dear friends, I am back with another terrifying story, once again brought to us by our friend Mr. Freaky. He was kind enough to recommend this story to me, so thank you to him, and make sure you go look at him in the description down below. Now, on to this story. I've always found animatronics kinda creepy. I honestly don't really understand how they've ever become so popular, because there was never a time in history when non-living things copying human mannerisms wasn't terrifying. I guess maybe it's sort of like a car wreck. While it's terrifying, you just can't seem to look away. My wife and I visited Death Valley on a weekend road trip. It was incredible getting to look out and see the completely open air away from the hustle and bustle of the big city. The sunset was magnificent, truly one of the most awe-inspiring things I've ever seen. Just coming out to the highway wasn't nearly enough for us, though. We wanted no sign of civilization in sight, so we got onto a small dirt road and started driving out into the desert. Finally, we found a little place to pull into off the side of the road and get into the back of the truck. I blew up my air mattress in the back and we laid on it beneath the sky full of stars. About an hour later, though, I woke to a strange voice murmuring out in the darkness. I looked around for a bit, but saw nothing. Figured it was some sort of dream in my half-awake state. I laid back down to sleep. I woke to the sun blazing down on my face and hot sand blowing across my skin. Considering that when we had gotten there the night before, it was completely dark, I looked around the area, fascinated at where we had ended up. There was nothing around for miles except for 50 feet away from my car. There was something standing out in the desert. It looked surreal. I hopped off the truck and realized it was an old Chuck E. Cheese animatronic. Not having seen one of those in years, I got very excited and told my wife to come over. It had many of its old mechanisms still in place too. In fact, it was honestly a bit strange that someone would leave such an intact animatronic out there to rot. There was also an old note taped to the bottom with writing, but it had long since faded away. I decided to take the animatronic with us. I'm a pretty decent mechanic, and I figured I could fix it. After bringing it back to the house, I put it up in my shed, but my wife hated the thing and would ask me what I was going to do with it every chance she got. I kept telling her I'd fix it up and make it cool so I could give it to our son Matthew. That only bought me a week and a half, though. So I started working on it and eventually got it done pretty quickly. I was even able to give it to Matthew on his birthday. A couple weeks later, I set it up in his playroom, even buying some of the actual Chuck E. Cheese clothes online and putting them on him. I realized it really looked like one of the ones in the restaurant, and he already loved the characters, so he was nuts when he saw it, that I had built him his own animatronic. He would play for hours with that thing. Even though I couldn't really get it to sing all that well, it always jammed up, and it had a mysterious hum emitting from its backside. I figured that was probably why someone had abandoned it out in the desert in the first place. Over the coming months, he seemed to create a friendship with the thing. We would hear him chatting in the room with it all day long. It started to disturb us a bit, though, because when we would walk into the room, he would immediately stop talking, as if the conversation was private. I asked him once what they were saying, and he told me that Chucky was telling him about all the things they could do for fun. He also said that Chucky wasn't his name anymore. He said its name was Matthew now, and that he was Chucky. I thought that was weird, but he was a 6-year-old. Probably wasn't the weirdest thing he had ever said, but when he started dressing Chucky in his clothes, I started getting a bit more concerned. Every time I would ask him why he was putting clothes on Chucky, he would say that it wasn't Chucky, it was Matthew. At the same time, he began to grow more and more distant. He wouldn't answer us when we would ask him questions, and he wouldn't even hug us anymore. It was like he had become a total stranger. Thinking there might be some real psychological issues going on with them, we scheduled a few sessions with the therapist, but she basically told us what we already knew. Matthew had the belief that he wasn't Matthew anymore, was totally convinced that the Chuck E. Cheese animatronic was the real Matthew. Horrified, we told him he wasn't allowed to play with the animatronic anymore. That night at dinner, we were disturbed by a knock at the door. It was a woman, telling me to stop scaring the neighborhood kids with our robot waving out the window. I told her it couldn't wave and that it wasn't even pointed towards the window. She scoffed and turned away, not believing me. Stunned, I slowly walked back to the playroom to check. When I opened the door, I noticed that the Chucky was now looking out the window. I thought maybe Matthew had turned it around at some point, but he said it wasn't him. This stuff was really starting to freak me out, so I moved the animatronic out to my work shed again and planned to dismantle it the first chance I got. Matthew did not like the idea, though. He said that He said that Chucky didn't like being out there in the shed, and if I didn't bring him back, I would regret it. Hearing that from my own son scared me so much. But I also noticed that he finally referred to the animatronic as Chucky, its own name again, which made me feel like I'd made the right move. Later that night, I awoke to Matthew standing above my bed, holding a kitchen knife in his hand. He was in some sort of trance, just whispering, "Where a kid can be a kid, where a kid can be a kid," over and over again. I grabbed his arm and ripped the knife away and tossed it to the ground. He immediately awoke, crying. The next day I brought the animatronic to the dumpster outside the local Walmart and just left it there. Afterwards, I felt a bit calmer. I think I had finally ridden the house of the horrifying thing. Sadly, I was sorely mistaken. I went outside the next day and the animatronic was back in front of our house, staring at me with this disturbing rat smile. I was beside myself and filled with rage. Immediately, I brought it to the shed and tried to disassemble it. Something. It was weird, though. None of the bolts would come out. Eventually, I moved to bolt clippers, a sledgehammer, and even a blowtorch. Nothing seemed to damage the thing. Even scarier was each time I would take out a new tool, I would notice that its eyes were pointed at me, no matter where I was in the room. Out of ideas, I tossed the animatronic in the back of my truck and started driving. I didn't know where I was going at first, but eventually I ended up back in Death Valley. I found that little dirt path out to the desert, and I started driving down it. I ended up in the exact same spot where I left it. I took it out of the truck and I left it there. Except at the bottom I attached a note, reading, "Beware this animatronic. Horrifying things may happen to you and your family if you allow this into your home. Please stay away." Luckily, it's been months, and I haven't seen the animatronic again. Matthew has started returning back to normal, and he doesn't have much recollection of the entire event. I still think about it almost every day, though, about what would have happened if I hadn't woken up when I did. So be careful what you bring into your home. There are things out there that appear to be sweet and innocent, but just underneath the surface, they have truly sinister intentions. So, if you enjoyed that little tale, please like, subscribe, go check out the other stories and other videos we have with my comrades here on this channel. And make sure to check out the author down in that description. He is quite the author, and I quite enjoy his stories. Good night, everyone.